The Trail of Tears was a massive event that occurred due to Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act in 1838 to 1839. He forced the Cherokee Nation to give up their land east of the Mississippi River and move to where present-day Oklahoma is. The Cherokee Nation left everything behind and were faced with starvation, disease, death, and exhaustion. The removal consisted of multiple tribes. To name a few, there was the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw. A Georgia soldier even said, "I fought through the war between the states and I've seen many men shot, but the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew." Thousands of Cherokee died as a result of this journey.
In the 1830s, Congress had created a huge new Indian Territory, which was to stretch from Texas to the middle Missouri River. It was meant to be a barrier to white expansion, a place the Indians were promised they would have to themselves forever.
After years of Supreme Court battles, the bill passes Congress by a single vote. Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, Seminole, Cherokee, all forced off their nations by the point of a bayonet. An episode in the conquest of the West that even some of the soldiers taking part find shameful. U.S. Army Private John G. Burnett writes,
"The sufferings of the Cherokee were awful. The trail of the exiles was a trail of death. They slept in the wagons and on the ground without fire. I saw as many as 20 die in a single night of pneumonia, cold, exposure."
Move along. Move along.
The United States should not have forcibly removed the Cherokee Nation from its homeland in 1838 and 1839. This split apart a unified people who had chosen to live together for centuries, organizing themselves around a sophisticated common law with a capital and recognized regions and all 7 family clans represented in every town. This was a people that wanted to live together, who had, as Augustine said, loved things held in common, and they were sundered apart by coercion. Now, the Cherokees are found in the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, the Eastern Band of Cherokees in North Carolina, and in various other communities across the United States and even Mexico. No longer the coherent nation they had been. Obviously, it was wrong when we consider the loss of life that took place in the forcible removal of the Cherokees from their home in the southeast to what was Indian Territory, now the state of Oklahoma in the Midwest. The official U.S. reports suggest that roughly 400 people died. We know that, in fact, at least that many died in the containment centers where they were rounded up, the camps where they were held before removal even physically happened, before the marches. The marches that took place over 2,200 miles of land and sea routes, moving the people from the east to the Midwest. The people who witnessed the Trail of Tears, people who were landowners on areas where the Trail of Tears went past, or missionaries, or people who traveled for one reason or another with the Cherokees, suggest that the number was more like 4,000 instead of 400. Today, scholars think that's probably a conservative figure. Somewhere between a quarter and a third of the Cherokee Nation was lost during the Trail of Tears. And those who were lost were those who were least likely to be able to endure starvation, exposure to the elements, marching 10 miles a day in knee-deep snow, for example. In other words, the elderly and the infants, so that the bulk of the Cherokee Nation arrived in Indian Territory without its past and without its future, without its oldest and youngest members. It's also a moral wrong because one of the arguments used to justify the Trail of Tears was a bald-faced lie, the idea that the Cherokees would not be comfortable in the environment of the new United States. But the fact is, by the 1830s, the Cherokees had a written language, a written and ratified constitution, a bilingual national press, a bilingual national newspaper, institutions of higher learning for both men and women. Some scholars suggest a significantly higher literacy rate for the Cherokees than for members of the surrounding states. The idea that Cherokees could not adapt, could not at some level assimilate with the culture is ridiculous. But it was a justification for taking things away from Cherokees and giving them to U.S. citizens. But my statement that the Cherokee Trail of Tears shouldn't have happened is more than just a moral claim. It's an objective statement of fact. There's several reasons for this. One, constitutionally, it should never have happened.
For generations, the Cherokee had lived side by side with whites in Georgia. They had devised a written language, published their own newspaper, adopted a constitution, and the Christian faith. But after gold was discovered on their land, even they were told they would have to start over again in the West. One by one, Indian peoples were removed to the West. The Delaware, Ottawa, Shawnee, and Potawatomi. The Sac and Fox, Miami and Kickapoo. The Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole. In all, some 90,000 Indians were relocated. The Cherokee were among the last to go. Some reluctantly agreed to move. Others were driven from their homes at bayonet point. Almost 2,000 of them died along the route they remember as the Trail of Tears.
The Cherokee are probably the most tragic instance of what could have succeeded in American Indian policy and didn't. All of these things that Americans would proudly see as the hallmarks of civilization are born to the West by Indian people. They do everything we ask except one thing. What the Cherokees ultimately are, they may be Christian, they may be literate, they may have a government like ours, but ultimately they're Indian. And in the end, being Indian is what kills them.